Hello, welcome to today's episode of A Slice of Medieval. Today we're joined by Catherine Hanley, who also writes as C.B. Hanley and J.F. Andrews, and was born in Australia. Since moving to the UK, she has lived in many corners of it and is currently based in the rural West Country with her husband and 3 children. Her love of medieval studies led to a PhD and a number of academic publications. She now splits her time between writing popular non-fiction history and historical fiction. Her historical fiction series is about Edwin Weaver, who's based at Conisbrough Castle, so right on my home turf. Today, she's here to talk about my favourite of Richard the Lionheart's sisters, Joanna of England, Queen of Sicily and Countess of Toulouse, the Lioness Heart. Welcome, Catherine.
Hello.
Thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
So we'll start with the general of what attracts you to the 12th and 13th centuries.
Oh, well, I've been interested in this era for basically as long as I can remember. Firstly, when I was younger, the stories about the different historical figures. And then later on, as I studied more, in the real depth and richness of the primary source material from this age. So I then, my PhD involved studying this material, all this primary source material. I specialised in 12th and 13th century warfare, but the material not only tells you about what warfare was actually like at the time, but it can also give you some real insights into what contemporary people thought about it. So I studied not only, the chronicles, but also epics and chansons de geste and romance texts to find out all about, to really immerse myself in the 12th and 13th century. So by the time I'd finished that, I was kind of so deep in the 12th and 13th centuries that I couldn't get out, even if I wanted to. And I've been there ever since.
I don't blame you. I seem to remember I put out a tweet in 2020 that I was just going back to the 13th century and staying there till everything was over when COVID was out. It is... I find it a fascinating period. I think people go for the Tudors because it's easy, and then you go look at the 13th century and there's so much to cover.
Sorry, I think I fell into a brief coma there when you said Tudor.
Don't we all?
I recovered when you said 13th century, so it's all fine.
Yeah. Well, it's like King John. He's fascinating. He's not a nice man, but he's such a fascinating study. So are the whole family. I mean, they weren't exactly a well-balanced family, were they?
No. I think if you were looking for a dictionary definition of dysfunctional, that would be it. But although there were there were sons and daughters in the family, and I think it's just fair to say that the sons have kind of hogged most of the attention over the years. So let's do something about that, Sharon.
Oh yes, definitely. I had a whole chapter in my Ladies of Magna Carta, I think it was, or was it in? No, they were all in Heroines of the Medieval World, and they've appeared in so many things. And my next book that's coming out is Princesses of the Early Middle Ages. And
send me a copy of that.
I will do.
I'm sorry, I'm just putting that on my wish list now.
Yeah, all 3 of them are in there. That one's a rather long chapter.
So within that period, obviously you focused on an awful lot of things over the years. So in this book, we're talking about Joanna, who is one of Richard's sisters. But why did you choose Joanna to focus on rather than? I mean, he had quite a lot of sisters, so why Joanna?
Well, there's kind of 2 answers to that. Okay, so on the one hand, it's just such an exciting story. Anyone who thinks medieval princesses just sort of sat around doing embroidery has obviously never met one. You know, she traveled, she had adventures, and it's not just her kind of her own life, but the things that she experienced during that life can also tell us a huge amount about medieval royal women. So she's a brilliant, brilliant subject. And then on the other hand, to be very, very prosaic for a moment, you know, there are some practical considerations. So, okay, Richard the Lionheart's got 5 sisters. He's got 3 full sisters and 2 half sisters from his mother's first marriage. So Marie, Alex, Matilda, Leonor, and Joanna. And from a very practical point of view, there's already a super biography of Marie, so no point doing that. There's not enough evidence to write one about Alex because she hardly appears in any records at all, so she normally just gets tacked on to things about Marie. And I can't read Spanish, which would be a prerequisite for writing about Leonor, who was the Queen of Castile from the time she was 9 years old. So that left Matilda or Joanna. And Joanna sort of shaded it, really, due to the greater variety of her experiences, because I was able to get, you know, the Mediterranean and the Crusades and lots of things in there. So Sharon, there's an opening for you there, book on Matilda.
It's tempting. It's very tempting because Matilda was the one who she gets kicked out of Germany and has to come home and spend some time with her mother. And she was the one who actually spoke to Henry II to get him to ease the restrictions on Eleanor's imprisonment. But all 3 of them, Matilda, Leonor, and Joanna, we often get the idea that these princesses are sent away from home, never to see anyone they knew ever again. And all 3 of them saw their mother later in their lives. Joanna in particular, didn't she?
Yeah, she absolutely did in Sicily when Eleanor arrived with Berengaria of Navarre in tow. And yeah, Eleanor saw all of them again. But actually, even in families where princesses didn't see their parents or their siblings again, because of course Joanna actually never saw Matilda or Leonor after her marriage, even then it's not a case of they were married off to a foreign country and everyone forgets about them. You know, the whole point of this marriage is that it's a strategic alliance. And what's the point of having a strategic alliance if the 2 parties don't talk to each other?
These women... I've been saying in my new book.
These women were expected to act as, you know,
diplomats.
Kind of bridges and diplomats, exactly, as you say. That was their role in life, to be the representative both of their birth family and the family that they've married into. And it was a really important role. You know, far too often we just read, oh, she was married off at a young age to XYZ, you know, so that's the end of the story.
And how many children she had.
Yeah, and it's not the end of the story, it's the beginning of the story.
And that's why I argue that they were educated to a very deep level. Maybe they weren't necessarily taught to write because they had clerks to do that, but they were taught to read, they were taught diplomacy, politics. They had to be, you know, they were taught from the cradle to be the first ambassadors.
Yeah, they had the equivalent of an MA in international political relations.
Yeah.
You know,
and that often gets overlooked for the embroidery and babies. But and I think that's often, I mean, you say in the book about how William didn't set Joanna aside when they didn't have any children. But it makes sense because she was a big link to a very important European family. So to set her aside would set aside that diplomacy, those diplomatic relations. Yeah. And you can't...
If you disrespect Joanna, you are disrespecting Henry II, and this is never a good idea.
Yeah, I think, though, that maybe this image of medieval princesses and so on comes essentially from the historical emphasis on the actions of men for so long.
Yeah.
So that, you know, oh, well, that's the woman dealt with, she was married off. But let's get back to the real thing. It was kind of that attitude of only the men did anything of any importance, and that obviously has changed over recent decades. But that was how history was written, essentially, and history that was about a woman. It usually had to be somebody like Eleanor of Aquitaine, who was such a huge character that she couldn't be ignored by history.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what we've got to remember is that most of the people, or the men, I should say, who wrote these contemporary political chronicles were not only men, but they were clerics, they were monks
Mm.
or priests, and they didn't have a great deal of experience at interacting with women. They just sort of sidelined women. And then this situation was exacerbated because when in, say, the mid 19th century, scholars of medieval history started to pick up on these 12th and 13th century chronicles, they also lived in a milieu where women did not play a great public role. So it kind of never occurred to them to start mining around to look for women's stories. And it's only really...
Let's just get this straight. We're blaming the Victorians again.
Sharon was laughing when you were talking because almost every episode we say it's all the fault of the Victorians.
Oh, was it? Okay. Oh, I've fallen into the obvious trap there. But no, and it's only sort of since the mid 20th century that people have started saying, well, actually, hang on, if we look at this more carefully, and more modern historians, they're not making this stuff up about medieval women. They're just looking more deeply and looking in a different place for evidence and putting it together in a different way. And that's kind of what I hope I've done with this book, because the subtitle being The Life and Times of Joanna Plantagenet sort of gave me a get out of jail free card to go off on a tangent every so often about royal child marriage or women on crusades or things like that.
Well, you have to, though, because it's not a woman, a person, they're not in this world on their own. So you have to, like you say about the crusades or the reasons for marriage and things, there is a wider context for an individual person.
Yeah. And you've got to situate your person in that context. Yeah.
So I think you've done a really good job of it, actually. It was, very entertaining, very easy read, very entertaining, and so much information. I was like, I went through it just before sending in my book. I thought, just have another look, make sure I've got everything right. And I went into mine. I thought, I'm sure I didn't write that. Went into mine. Oh yeah, I did. Okay, I'm good.
Yeah, no,
Catherine agrees with me. I can't be too bad.
That's kind of exactly the reaction I was looking for. I know one shouldn't read one's book reviews, but I did read one once that said, I like Catherine Hanley's writing because I feel like we're sitting down with a cup of tea and she's telling me a story. And I think that's one of the best things anyone's ever said about that I have that in the back of my mind, when I'm writing, don't bore people, stick to, find out what's really interesting and tell everyone about it.
And you do like I do, which is put in quotes from the chronicles and things, but not too many.
Don't overwhelm it. Yeah.
And don't make it academic theses are great, but most people just feel bogged down in them. So it's like making sure it all moves along at a good pace.
Yeah, it's like I read all this, so you didn't have to.
Yeah. So what was Joanna's early life like? And did she know any of her siblings well?
Okay, in her very early life, as a baby and a toddler, she was in Eleanor of Aquitaine's personal household, along with her two older sisters. So she was in their company, but she was only 2 years old when Matilda, the eldest of her four sisters, was sent to Germany to be married. And she was only about 4.5 when Leonor was sent to Castile. So in fact, she's probably had no sort of meaningful memories of them apart from what she'd heard from her mother or other people. But when she was about 5, maybe 6, she and her only younger sibling, John, were sent to Fontevraud to be educated. And they remained there several years together. So actually, he was probably the one that she knew best. She also spent a more significant amount of time than you might have expected with her mother, because she actually shared the first couple of years of Eleanor's captivity when she was imprisoned by Henry II. So they were together, just the two of them, really, for quite a long time. So that probably had quite a great influence on her, her outlook on life. I mean, if you're going to learn about how to be a queen, there's just not really a better person that you can learn from than Eleanor of Aquitaine. But yeah, it's interesting that her fullest and most intense sibling relationships were actually with two of her brothers rather than any of her sisters, John in earlier life and Richard later on.
Yeah, I like the idea that she at least had John with her at Fontainebleau, and you wonder how much they were allowed to be together as siblings with the nuns.
Yeah, I mean, probably we can't tell, but probably at that age, as they were so young, probably quite a lot. Because boys up to the age of about 6 or 7, they were just kept in this sort of, well, not a nursery at Fontevraud, but they probably were educated together, and it would only be after they moved away from there that they were separated, and he went one way and she went the other.
But how old would she have been when she was with Eleanor in captivity?
That was when she was between 8 and 10.
So
Quite
yeah,
formative
yeah,
years.
yeah.
Yeah, you can imagine Eleanor giving her all she needs to know for her life as a wife and diplomat.
And boy, did she need it.
Yeah. And also, Eleanor had also had the experience of two very different husbands to impart, and probably the wisdom that no bloke is going to be perfect, darling.
Well, yeah, it's medieval royal marriage for a woman. It's a career. So a royal princess would not expect, we feel sorry for them now having their husbands chosen for them, but a medieval royal princess would not expect to be able to choose her own husband, or not her first husband. It was just like part of the lot that she'd drawn in life. She could no more choose her husband than she could choose her parents or who her siblings were. But what her job was once she was married to that man who'd been chosen for her, her job was, to make that her career, to be his queen or his duchess or whatever. And as we were saying earlier, to act as that diplomatic bridge. It was what she made of her marriage after she was married that was what counted. And some women made a better success of that than others, and some had better opportunities than others, but all she could do was orient herself to the situation in which she'd been placed and make the best of it. And I think Joanna genuinely did that after she married William II of Sicily when she was 11,
Yeah.
incidentally.
And I think you can see in her life, especially the way she handled Richard's suggestion that she married Saladin's brother, you can see the influence that her mum had on her in the role that she was going to play. She decided how she was going to be a queen, and what she would take and what she wouldn't take. And she was adamant
Yeah,
with Richard that no, I'm not good, that's too far.
yeah, there's being a helpful representative of your family, and there's being a doormat. And neither Joanna nor Eleanor of Aquitaine could ever be described as doormats.
Yeah. You mentioned Sicily, so let's sort of have a look at that. What do we know about her life in Sicily?
Um, Kind of sounds weird, but both a lot and a little. So factually, we know about her marriage to William II. We know when it took place. We know what the royal palace looked like. We know who else was at the court, and what the politics were and so on. But as we might expect, we know almost nothing about what she thought or felt about any of this. You know, we can only extrapolate from the evidence that was available, and that wasn't the kind of thing that contemporary chroniclers wrote down. However, when we are reading between those lines, you know, and looking at what evidence there is, it suggests that Joanna and William had at least a pleasant and amicable relationship, and probably something more, you know. Um, the evidence suggests, you know, he treated her well, and you know, we'd like to think this wasn't just because she was the daughter of Henry II, but because, you know, he actually liked her. He saw to her education. When they began cohabiting, you know, he was pleasant to her. When she didn't have any children, he didn't put her aside, and that's like a big flag to me, because so many medieval kings, if their wives didn't produce them a son, made use of every excuse they could think of to get rid of them, and William II didn't do that. And conversely, you know, after he died, we have good evidence that Joanna wanted to carry out his wishes, even though it put herself in danger. We do have good evidence that she wanted to carry out William's wishes after he died. Now, obviously, they had no children, and William also had no brothers or sisters. So this meant he had to designate somebody who was going to be his heir, and he designated his aunt, Constance of Sicily. It sounds weird, although she was his aunt, she was actually younger than he was. But let's not get into the Sicilian royal family tree, or we'll be here all day. And Joanna supported that because it was what William had wanted. But Constance was usurped by a chap called Tancred, who was a member of the royal family but was illegitimate and would therefore be normally be barred from the throne. But he was both a very experienced military leader and, of course, a man. And he sort of came in, took over, had himself crowned, and had Joanna imprisoned because she'd stood up. She'd vocally said that she supported the claims of Constance. And, you know, in the circumstances, that was a very, very brave thing to do. And had she belonged to any other family, her story might have been a very short book, because her story might have ended with, and she was imprisoned for the rest of her life. But because she was the member of this extended family, and because she had been doing her job, acting as a bridge between them all these years, she was then able to reap the benefits of it when somebody very important in her life turned up to help.
So that's Richard the Lionheart.
Yes, it certainly is. Although he was on his way to Sicily anyway, because he was on his way to the Holy Land on what we would later call the Third Crusade. And of course, he did, on landing in Sicily, insist that Tancred release his sister. But I think it's also fair to say this was as much to do with his own honour and his own family honour and standing as it was for particular concern over Joanna's person. I mean, the idea that some nobody like Tancred could hold prisoner the sister of the King of England is just really offensive to him. So he did insist that Joanna was released, and she was released within days of him arriving. But Tancred initially kept hold of all of Joanna's property. So she's got this, what we call dower property, which is property that King William had assigned for her use, for her financial support if he died first. And she should have all these lands and incomes. And initially, Tancred kept hold of these. So Richard stayed on Sicily, allowing his men to engage in acts of violence deliberately until Tancred agreed to a money settlement as well. And this is where it becomes really quite clear that Richard's concerns are his own rather than Joanna's, because with no reference to Joanna, he enters into negotiations with Tancred, and Tancred says, well, how about instead of all these lands and incomes, I just convert that into a one-off cash sum? And Richard said, OK, that's fine. And Tancred handed over the cash sum, and Richard pocketed the lot. And Joanna didn't see a penny of it. He took it all for his crusade expenses. So I think that does give us some idea of his priorities. I mean, I'm not saying he didn't care for his sister at all, just that she probably wasn't his top priority. And so now she's not only a widow, she's a penniless widow. And, you know, the difference between being a rich widow and being a penniless widow is quite significant. So she's actually got no choice at all but to join Richard's entourage and go wherever he goes, because she's got nowhere to live and no way to pay any staff and, you know, almost literally nothing to eat unless she follows him round.
So is Sicily a usual stopping point on the way to Crusade, or do you think Richard planned it so that he could visit his sister and brother-in-law? Because he might not yet have known that William was dead by when he set off.
No, it was a very usual stopping point. I mean, this
Right.
was one of the reasons why Henry II had arranged this marriage in the first place, because Sicily was a very useful stopping off point on your way to the Crusades. So that was kind of almost why Joanna was there in the first place.
I love this, the way men plan things. It's like when you're going on the motorway, isn't it? It's, oh, Auntie so and so lives there. We could stop and say hello and have a cuppa rather than stop at the services.
I have no comment on this.
The Third Crusade is an adventure Joanna could have done
Yes.
without, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, well, I mean, yes and no. Yes and no. On the one hand, it was an incredible opportunity to have. You know, she could go to the place where, you know, she believed God had walked on earth. You know, all her life she's been hearing all these biblical stories about Jesus and the, you know, the miracles and the Holy Land and Jerusalem and Nazareth and all these places. And she got the opportunity to go there. And to stand on the soil of the Holy Land, which was not an opportunity that was given to all that many people in medieval Europe. And it must have been quite a spiritual experience, as it was for a lot of the Crusaders and the Pilgrims. But of course, on the other hand, yes, it's a scene of violence and bloodshed and sickness, all to be endured. And she could probably have done without that, and she could certainly have done without Richard's suggestion to offer her up as a peace offering, as a bride for Saladin's brother, without actually, you know, telling her about it first.
Although I think he probably thought, I can't tell her about it because she'll just say no.
Which is exactly what she did say in no uncertain terms. Once it was, I mean, let's sort of unpack that a bit there. I mean, we have to remember, you know, religious relations in the 12th century were very different to how they are today. And she's been brought up all this time with no, you know, not really an idea of integration. As far as the Crusaders are concerned, Muslims are the enemy. And although she's lived on Sicily, which does have Muslims, Jews, and Christians, they weren't integrated. They were communities who lived side by side without, you know, resorting to violence. But in the Holy Land, you know, the situation is very different. And she's also been taught all her life that her religion is the one true religion. And so to be asked to marry a Muslim would be making her what we call an apostate, which would send her straight to hell, as far as the doctrines of the church are concerned. So this is a very serious thing. It's not just a personal thing of you'll have to live here for the rest of your life and never see any of your friends and family again. It's you will lose your immortal soul. And, you know, can you be surprised that for, you know, she actually, you know, she stood up to him. I mean, telling Richard the Lionheart no to his face was not something many people did. But this was something she felt obliged to do. And unfortunately for her, of course, she could get the churchmen on side. You know, if she was just saying, I don't want to marry the man you've set up for me because I don't like him, that would be one thing. But she could get, obviously, Richard's host has got bishops and clergymen in it. So she can get them on side saying, my brother is trying to force me to, you know, to leave the church and become an apostate. So they would sort of take her side. So she had a bit of backup, but still it was quite a brave thing to do, to just sort of say to him, you know, the mighty King of England and warrior, to say, no, I'm not doing that. And I admire her for that decision.
Yeah, same here. I think you mentioned in the book a woman in those days, she had to pick her battles and work out which argument was worth carrying on with. And this was one of those battles where she wasn't going to acquiesce.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there would have been, for example, no point whatsoever in trying to argue against the choice of her first husband, who had been chosen for her by her father when she was 10 years old. There's no choice at all. And there's no point if you're a 12th century woman and you recognise that, you know, this is something that's just there's no point. It's no point wasting your energy in fighting a battle that you know you're destined to lose. But in this case, because there was this sort of idea that she could prevail if she wanted to, it was worth investing the, you know, the energy and the emotional energy in saying no and arguing back. And yeah, picking your battles was a big thing for medieval women. Sometimes you're never going to win.
Yeah, it was a big risk because when she chose Constance over Tancred, Tancred imprisoned her. Her brother could have just done the same thing, couldn't he? He could have just put her under arrest because she refused to marry Saladin's brother. And it would have made her life difficult.
Yeah,
but having the backing of the church
helped her, and she was clever enough to recognize that that was the way to go about it, rather than just making a personal objection. So, yeah, props to her.
Yeah, very politically astute mind. And the Holy Land itself, I mean, did she see some horrors? Would she have seen Richard the Lionheart's execution of 2,700 plus prisoners?
The short answer to that is we don't know. I would, judging from kind of what we know of customs and things, I think it's probably unlikely that she was actually dragged out of the city of Acre onto the plain to actually watch it happen. But she was in Acre at the time. And I mean, I don't want to go into this too deeply, but if you imagine the practical logistics of 2,700 decapitations, it's not something that you can ignore, even if you're not directly watching it. You know, the sight, the smell, the clear up, the violence, you know, she must have been aware of it, even if she wasn't directly witnessing what was happening. And you know, it's pretty horrific.
Yeah, she married Raymond of Toulouse. Did she have any say in that marriage, or not?
Well, this is where I would speculate or posit that probably she did. Right now, the official record is that Richard once again offered his sister as a bride to Raymond of Toulouse. So the background of this is very complicated, but the Counts of Toulouse and the Dukes of Aquitaine, because of course Richard is the Duke of Aquitaine as well as the King of England, have been in dispute for about 100 years over who should control the county of Toulouse. And of course, the best way to solve a dispute like this is a marriage alliance. You know, Richard's got an awful lot on his plate. By this time, he's left the Holy Land, he's been imprisoned, he's been released again, and he's come back to Europe. And we'll skip over that because we're talking about Joanna, not about Richard. And he's got an awful lot on his plate. He's the King of England, he's the Duke of Normandy, he's the Duke of Aquitaine, he's the Count of Anjou. You know, he can't be everywhere at once. So being able to kind of cross Toulouse off his to-do list, if you like, is quite a good thing. Now he doesn't want to do that just by dropping his claim, because again that would, you know, offend his sense of honor and his sense of self, blah blah blah. So the best way to solve this is via a marriage alliance, and the you know, the official record is that in order to do this, he suggested, you know, Joanna as a bride for Raymond. Now, this is where we can sort of read between the lines a bit. First of all, we can read between the lines with the definite information that Joanna did not say no to this, in the same way that we already know that she said no to marrying Aladil in the Holy Land. But we also know that she had met Raymond on several occasions, and in fact had spent at least a month in his company when she was on her way back from the Holy Land and Rome without Richard, because she came back while he was still in captivity, and he had actually escorted her party all the way through Toulouse. Other evidence, he was known to be quite personable. You know, he was a cultured man. He wasn't just a sort of out and out warrior. His court had poets and artists, and he was known to be quite personable. There's also the idea that Joanna, of course, needs to marry again, because if she doesn't get married again, she's going to be this penniless widow getting dragged around by Richard and eventually becoming more and more of an irrelevance, and eventually, as she gets older, an encumbrance. Her only way to get more status again is to marry again. Now, for somebody of her status, that will often mean another foreign country. And it's possible that she sort of looked at this idea and thought, yeah, Toulouse, that's next door to Aquitaine, where my mum lives. And and it's more familiar, after all these years of Sicily and imprisonment and the Holy Land and uncertainty on the way back, having somewhere stable to live that was also in France with a language she already spoke, with a man whom she'd actually already met, which again quite unusual and possibly light. So it's just possible that she might have sort of popped the idea into Richard's head while making him think that it was all his own idea, which is obviously the way to go about it. Now, we don't know that, but I'm just suggesting that it's possible that happened. And we certainly know for definite that even if it was Richard that suggested it, that she certainly raised no objections. So
yeah, and she knew Raymond, so and she was a widow, so she could have objected whether or not Richard would have listened to her. But she could have objected, and she knew what she was objecting to.
Yeah. She was certainly willing, and possibly more.
Yeah. And yet Raymond had a bit of a checkered marital history, didn't
he? He's already been married twice by this stage. He was married very young, and his first wife died quite young. And they didn't have any children. But yeah, his second wife had actually left him, which was probably should have been a bit of a clue for Joanna. And yeah, to start with, it was, sunshine and roses. They got married. And don't forget, Joanna has also suffered opprobrium while she's been the Queen of Sicily, and that she was the Queen of Sicily for 11 years without ever bearing William a child. So there's this sort of thing hanging over her head about being barren and all this sort of thing, because it was often women who were blamed.
How old was she at that point?
When she married Raymond?
Yeah, roughly.
It's about 30.
Right.
So, still time. And, to her and Raymond's great delight, they got married, and she gave birth to a son and heir for him exactly 9 months after the wedding. So this kind of is great, not only for their own family position and for Raymond's, but it also kind of wipes clean some of the slurs, that have been cast at her over the years. And then she did it again the following year. She had, it was a girl this time, but she had another child. So she's got Raymond Jr. Don't get me started on the Counts of Toulouse all being called Raymond. And
yeah, I did William the Warren.
Oh yes, true. And so she has baby or toddler Raymond and baby Joan. Actually, the same name as her in French is Jeanne, but we normally translate hers as Joanna and her daughter's as Joan, just to sort of differentiate them slightly. And then basically it all went wrong. I mean, Raymond had quite evidently not been faithful to her, because he had an illegitimate child who was born in the same year as his and Joanna's daughter, Joan. And they were obviously having arguments about something, because at one point there's a record that says he just cuts off all of her financial support. And we actually have sort of letters that she's written saying that she can't afford to pay her bills and things like this. And so we don't exactly know what they argued about, whether it was personal or, again, whether it was religious, because Raymond, although he was never directly accused of being a heretic and a Cathar himself, he was suspected and accused of being far too lenient with this heretical sect, the Cathars that had arisen in his lands. And it may be that they argued about religion. We don't know, but whatever they argued about, it was so serious that Joanna actually decided to leave him which again is a really unusual thing. There were a lot of bad marriages around amongst medieval royalty and nobility, but in most cases the woman in the marriage was, expected to put up and shut up, and she wasn't going to do this. She actually left him.
And given the fact it happened twice to Raymond, I'd blame him.
There's a pattern there, and he actually, after Joanna, he married for a fourth and a fifth time as well. So let's not, so yeah, not a great track record, but still, this was a big thing for her to do, and it did mean that she was facing up to losing her children, because in law they belonged to their father, and her running away into Aquitaine and seeking safety and a separation is one thing. He might not have chased her, but if she'd attempted to take his son and heir with her, he would certainly have pursued in order to get his son or his children back. So she did have to leave them. She fled over the border into Aquitaine, which is where she knew her mother was, and also Richard was known to be in Aquitaine rather than England at the time. So she knew if she could reach them, she would be safe. I mean, Raymond of Toulouse might be powerful in Toulouse, but he's not going to argue with Richard the Lionheart and Eleanor of Aquitaine. Not both at the same time, anyway. But she reached Poitou, which is the northern half of Aquitaine, to discover that she was just too late and that Richard was dead. Literally, she missed him by about a week. He died about a week before she got there.
Well, she did get to her mum, didn't she?
Yes.
Or did she meet them at Richard's funeral?
Yes, we know that Joanna was at Fontevraud, or she may not have been there in time for the funeral, but shortly afterwards, because there is a charter of Eleanor of Aquitaine's, which she issued at Fontevraud a couple of weeks afterwards, and it lists Joanna as one of the witnesses, which she couldn't have been unless she was physically there. So she was there, she was safe, she was with her mother, and she was also pregnant again with another child of Raymond's, and again she did an incredibly unusual thing. She must have been really desperate not to be dragged back to Raymond, because she asked if she could be admitted as a nun at Fontevraud, and I mean, not just to live there like Eleanor lived there in a kind of retirement, but actually to take holy orders, which for a woman who was both married and pregnant was again quite unusual. But once she had taken holy orders, she would be completely safe from Raymond forever, because that would automatically dissolve the marriage. So yeah,
I wonder if that also, because the letters asking her to be admitted as a nun will say how desperate she is to become a nun, doesn't it? And I wonder if that actually hints at where her departure from Raymond was religious. Maybe she knew he'd done something or was about to do something that was so against the church that she wanted the protection of the church.
Yeah, we can only speculate, but her drastic actions do seem to indicate that it was more than a personal marital tiff, and yeah, the idea that this was based in a religious dispute is a plausible one. And yeah, she was desperate to take holy orders. I mean, she's only 33 at this stage. It's not exactly that she's retiring. She just really wants out of the world that she was in, and this was a way to do it. And of course, the stress of leaving Raymond, and the traveling quite quickly all the way through Aquitaine while she was pregnant hadn't done her health much good either, and it was quite clear that she was not in good health at this point. Now, interestingly, this is where one of my least favorite people of the Middle Ages, and one of everybody's least favorite people of the Middle Ages, actually steps up to the mark for once. When we started this chat, we were talking about how Joanna was at Fontevraud as a small child with her little brother John, and that they shared this childhood, which she didn't share with any of the others. Now, I'm not in any way attempting to rehabilitate John generally as a person or a king or a ruler, but it is true that he did demonstrate quite a sort of soft spot for Joanna. See, what the other thing that Joanna needs at this point is money, because she's still got no money. She's left her husband Raymond, who'd already cut off her financial support, and she'd never been repaid by Richard for the dower money that he took of hers in Sicily. And John actually agreed to pay it to her. And we know this because, again, there is solid evidence. There are 2 charters of his in which he says that he is giving money to his beloved sister Joanna as full repayment for the dower money that his brother King Richard had taken from her and never repaid, which is just one little clue that he might actually have been a human being under everything else.
Do we know what happened to the child, or was there a child, or in the end, or?
So by this time she's left Fontevraud and she's travelled with Eleanor, and they're in Rouen while this is happening, and they've met with John, and Rouen is where John has issued this charter. But really interestingly, they must have known how ill she was, because it doesn't say, I'm giving my sister this money to do whatever she wants with. It's saying, I'm giving my sister this money so she can bequeath it how she likes. Because immediately she's got this money, the first thing Joanna does is make a will. Now, it wasn't terribly uncommon for women to make wills before they went into labour, because going into labour was a very dangerous thing to do. But it seems to have been clear to all parties that she really wasn't expected to survive this labour. So she must have been quite obviously ill. But she was accepted as a nun, although she never actually made it back to Fontevraud. She went into labour while she was still in Rouen, and she died. And there is a possibility that the baby, which was a boy, lived just long enough to be baptised, but he died as well. And
it's quite a tragic story, isn't it? Really?
It's a tragic end, bless her.
It's a bit of a downer when you're writing a book about Joanna.
You want her to get a happy ending, and she doesn't.
To end it like that,
yeah,
just shy of her 34th birthday. Yes. I think she was at this time. So there's no way to gloss over the fact, that she died, but her wishes were carried out to the letter. She left a very, very detailed will, and it's really illustrative of her feelings, right? First of all, it doesn't mention Raymond once. But it does say that she's leaving money to have prayers and masses said for the souls of herself and her first husband, King William of Sicily. And I think that says something about, her personal feelings about either or both of them. And she left all sorts of bequests to, Fontevraud and different individuals, and to her servants who she paid off. And interestingly, the servants have got quite a wide variety of names. Some of them are quite westernized, the sort of names you would expect to hear from people that were French or from the nobility in England. But there was one of her servants was called Malacaxa, which was a Greek name. So this must have been somebody who traveled with her for a long time. So again, it shows, just looking at her will, is a real expression of her own. They're her own words in the will, which is not something, her own words are not things we hear in a lot of the other evidence. Most of the other evidence we have about her life is other people saying things about her. But her will is her own words, it's her own desires, it's her own wishes. And Eleanor of Aquitaine made sure they were carried out to the letter. And although she requested to be buried in Fontevraud, and she was originally buried in Rouen, but Eleanor had her remains moved, so she was buried at Fontevraud, and she's actually there. She hasn't got the effigy. There's these famous effigies at the abbey there of Henry.
Yeah, I've been there. Yeah, I've seen that.
There's Henry and Eleanor and Richard and Isabel of Angoulême, and Joanna is actually there, but and so is her son Raymond, actually, because when he died, he chose to be buried at Fontevraud with her, rather than in Toulouse with his
Ah.
father's family, which again I think is probably illustrative of something. And they had effigies that were in the same place, but rather than being recumbent ones, they were kneeling, and they were either side of the recumbent ones of her parents, but they were unfortunately destroyed later on, I think probably during the French Revolution. But her remains were not disturbed. They're still there, but you can't see the effigy anymore. But there is a drawing of it that's extant that was made before it was destroyed, and it's she and her son are both kneeling up facing each other
Oh,
over the effigies of her parents, which are, I think is quite
yeah,
nice.
that's sweet.
And so, yes, that is the end of the story. Sad, but an example of a medieval woman who could take action, and impose her own will in some circumstances, but not all. But she knew which battles to fight. And, when she identified a way in which she could have her own way and lead her own life, she did. And you can't say fairer than that, really.
No, definitely.
It's interesting that, so there are always archetypes, aren't they, in medieval history, where, either the medieval noblewoman is a sort of downtrodden and has absolutely no power at all, or they're rebellious and spirited and all the rest of it. And what I feel about Joanna is that she kind of sits in the middle as a genuine medieval noblewoman or royal woman who had choices sometimes, who fought, as you say, chose her battles and fought when she could. But it seems a far more realistic life than the picture that's often painted.
Yeah, that's exactly it. After many years and centuries of historians just basically writing that medieval women were, doormats with no agency, we have started to, redress the balance. But it's just as important to say that not all medieval women were these sort of girl boss CEO characters. They weren't all Eleanor of Aquitaine or Empress Matilda. And yet that's exactly right. And to me, this balance of the things she could do and the things she couldn't do actually make her, to me, a very real person.
Yeah, she's a good example of certainly of the challenges women faced at the time. And if you look at her life, you can tell where women as a whole would have been able to see where they had the chance to say yes and no, and where they didn't, where they had to go with the flow and just accept what was decided for them.
Absolutely.
Right. The next one is, what are you working on now? Having just received an email to tell me that I have been approved for a review copy of Nemesis on NetGalley. I know what's coming out next, and that's the book about Philip II, isn't it?
Yes. So I'm as ever, I'm working on several things at once because I like to have projects at different stages slotted in. So the next thing that's coming out is this book. It's called, it's slightly over dramatic, but it's called Nemesis, Medieval England's Greatest Enemy, which, if you know anything about the 13th century, will immediately point you towards Philip Augustus, the great King of France. Now, I've just signed off on the final proof to that, and it's gone to print. So I hope you like it. I think it's possibly one of my favourite things I've ever written. It's ever so slightly provocative in places because there is a lot in it about, Henry II and Richard the Lionheart and King John, but it's all told from the other way round.
Brilliant.
Because it's a book about Philip and about his motivations and about what he was doing. And I think, he often appears in scholarship, well, certainly in Anglophone scholarship, just as this kind of shadowy antagonist who just pops up at various points to oppose Henry II or Richard the Lionheart and then sort of disappears again. And I don't think we know enough about him and his motivations and everything that he did. So I have been telling his story from the other way around. Does give a slightly different picture of Richard the Lionheart to some of the ones you might be used to, but this is the whole point of publishing. We want to have different perspectives. So yes, I'm very much looking forward to that coming out in September.
I am too. I'm very much looking for. I love the idea of. I've always said if we're looking at French history, we have to do it from a French viewpoint rather than looking at it from the English viewpoint. So I'm looking forward to that.
Exactly. And then the next one, sort of back from that, is I'm just about to deliver a manuscript which is for publication next year, which is completely different. At the moment, it's called Women in Medieval Families. It might end up being called The Family Lives of Medieval Women or something similar. I don't know. And this is about, and actually I started off with an idea for this while I was writing about Joanna, because the question of family, in inverted commas, and what family, the word family, meant as a concept to medieval women is quite an interesting one. And so what I've done with this book is I've actually explored the family lives of women at all levels of society. So it's in 4 parts: royal women, noble women and gentry, townswomen and traders, and peasants and artisans. And so it's not like a general history of medieval women. It's specifically looking at the family lives of. So there's no nuns or anything.
Wow.
There's no nuns or convents in it. It's women who lived in families, and how they were generally, I mean, their lives were very, very different according to class. But something that runs through the whole book is the idea that in all cases and at all levels of society, women were not generally seen, or not supposed to be, individuals in their own right with hopes, dreams, ambitions of their own. They were representatives of their family. And this goes all the way from princesses like Joanna being married off to foreign lands to artisans and peasants women being expected to run shops and businesses just as part of what their husband did, or that kind of thing, at all levels of society. So I think it's very different from anything that I've written before, but I'm really pleased with how it's come out. So that's going off to my editor in about a fortnight.
Looking forward to that one.
I feel another podcast coming on.
And then I am also working on the first draft of a book for the year after that, which is quite a whopping volume, which is called The English at War in the Middle Ages.
Oh my goodness.
Yes, that is as big in scope as it sounds.
How many 100,000 words is that going to be?
Well, actually, part of my difficulty is that I've been given a very, very strict word limit. And I'm about 3/4 of the way through a first draft, and it's already longer than my total word limit. So part of my problem with that is going to be working out what to leave out.
Yes.
But it kind of does what it says on the tin: the English at war in the Middle Ages. So it runs from the Norman conquest in 1066 through to the end of the 100 Years' War in 1453. Me looking at years that begin with 14. I keep writing 11 by accident. I've just been through a chapter, and there's about 10 times where I've written 1165, where I actually meant 1365. So yes, I'm working my way through that, and it's partly it's a narrative of the wars, and it's also, there's some more technical stuff in it, because my background, my PhD is in medieval warfare, so there is some more technical stuff in it about the development of armor and weapons and techniques and things like that. But there's also a little thread running through it about, actually, in the Middle Ages, what did it mean to be English? Because starting with the Norman conquest, of course, the side that could most accurately be described as English is the side that lost the Battle of Hastings. But then under William the Conqueror, England is still England, and there's this sort of development in national identity that runs right through to the 100 Years' War. So yes, I'm trying to get all of that into not as many words as I would like. So I'll have to stop waffling and writing sarcastic asides and footnotes and things like that.
Oh, I love your asides, by the way. I really enjoyed those in Lioness.
It's like a whole running conversation going along in the footnotes, isn't there? With little asides. So might have to cut those down.
No, just leave a battle out.
Yeah, just so
Don't go down the aside.
the Agincourt, we all know about
Yeah,
that.
okay.
Yeah.
We won. There were some arrows.
Yeah, arrows, yeah. So yes, and on top of that, I'm also planning the next in my fictional series of medieval murder mysteries. So I've got quite a lot going on, but it's all good.
It keeps you out of trouble.
Yeah. I'd only be bored, as my mum would say.
Exactly.
You'd only be bored if you didn't have anything to do.
Well, thank you very much, Catherine. It has been an absolute pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you
We've
very much.
really enjoyed it, and I'm so glad we managed to get to talk about Joanna. She has to be, I think she's probably, apart from Nicola de la Haye, she's probably my favourite medieval woman. You know, they vie for my attention, her and Nicola de la Haye. So
Very glad to hear it.
so thank you very much for joining us. Do join us next time when Derek and I will be looking into the careers of the triumvirate of earls, Anglo-Saxon earls in the 11th century, the three powerful earls, Siward of Northumbria, Godwin of Wessex, and Leofric of Mercia. I've been Sharon Bennett Connolly.
And I'm Derek Birks. You might know already that all our podcasts are available on YouTube. Just search On a Slice of Medieval. And you can subscribe there, or you can subscribe to your favourite podcast provider. And if you have time, it would be great if you could give us a like or even a comment. Thanks for listening.